Retro Future.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Radio Retro Future. I am Bansert Bokel, your host, and today I have with me some people from Golden Dragon Games. And with that, let's just get straight into the interview. Could you please introduce yourself, sir?
Yes, my name is Zach. I am the head writer and lore master for Golden Dragon Games and its flagship world, Marcher Empires of War. As a day job, I am a media and cultural historian with a focus in East Asia. By night, I like staring at little plastic men that hopefully will kill each other on the battlefield.
Amazing. All right. So let's just delve into Marcher then. Give us the abridged version of what the game is, and what it is about.
Yes, so Golden Dragon Games is a small 3D modeling and tabletop wargaming company out of northern Tennessee. Specifically, a majority of our company is based out of Clarksville, which is also the home of Fort Campbell, very prominent U.S. military base. And it's kind of given us a little bit of an appreciation for military tech. Um, and we really specialize in our alternate history. Some people would describe it as weird war. Dieselpunk, our flagship IP that we are currently working on is Marcher Empires of War. The first most important question that Marcher asks is, what if World War One never happened? Now, obviously, there's probably about a billion different answers to how that could go. But more specifically, we're asking, what if the Holy Roman Empire never collapses? What if the war never breaks out? And if technology is pushed forward by several decades, in some cases, in certain fields, centuries? How does this change the war? How does this change different, societies and cultures? And most importantly, how many sponsons can we put on tanks?
I noticed that. I did mention that some tanks have really taken on Warhammer 40S type sponsor configurations.
Yeah, that was it's inescapable with our fan base. A lot of our fans are either current or former fans of Games Workshop and Warhammer 40K. Pretty much what usually happens is if we don't put sponsons on a boxy main battle tank,
Right.
they will usually pester and ask us eventually to add sponsons.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
I don't
unfortunately
Yeah,
an inevitability.
Well, first I need to be more successful, but yeah, I'm wondering if I'm gonna get that issue, because like with all these kinds of properties, it always goes back to Warhammer 40k, no matter what you do or how you design your stuff. And if they're not complaining that it looks too much like Warhammer 40k, they'll complain that it doesn't look enough like Warhammer 40k. I guess we're gonna talk a little bit about what inspired you to make this game.
Well, the team initially started out during the coronavirus pandemic. Our lead sculptor and basically the father of the company, Jackson Jewell, went through some hard times because of the coronavirus, employment difficulties. He had taken a break from university for a while. Pretty much a majority of the team has a long history in tabletop wargaming and tabletop games in general. And we also most of us on the writing team come from some form of like a historical background. Jackson, funnily enough, was kind of my student. I was a teaching assistant for one of his classes. And I got roped in because most of the team didn't have any expertise in East Asia. Some of our other writers, Jacob Euxter has a master's in history. We have Jacob Sullivan, who's a philosopher. So we're all history nuts. We've all played a lot of tabletop games. When you play a lot of tabletop games, you look at the ones that are popular and you sit there and you ask yourself, can I do this better? Can I do it my way and make it, something unique? And maybe I don't like war games as much as the rest of the team, but that I make up for it with my like passion and the story and the lore as somebody who's still kind of in the historical sphere.
So I guess what people really want to know is what set Marcher apart from other war games that are out there.
A large part of the general tabletop gaming sphere in general focuses functionality first, and then you make it work in the story. You're building a world around a game, and while obviously the game was kind of our end goal from pretty early on, in a lot of ways the world developed first. In a lot of ways, the lore has helped us define what the game is, and it's been very intriguing as we've written more and more stuff over the past 3 years. We constantly keep having to ratchet and adjust all of our rules to compensate for where the different factions go. And I think that's been a very interesting process. It's definitely caused some headaches with certain factions that we changed our minds on at different points in the development process. But if you like the story, then you're really gonna like the game. It's already on its own a good tabletop game. I think we have a very interesting story as well. We constantly joke about having a backlog of 3 or 4 spin-off games that in the same setting because we just have too much lore to go to waste, pretty much.
Yeah, I know what it's like because I work in a similar fashion on my own stuff as well. I'm finally working on the final chapters of my next book, trying to make, seeing if we're gonna do a Kickstarter where we can also do a tie-in to that, to the role-playing game we're working on. Except that's pretty hard to market on places like Kickstarter, so that's kind of a thing. But yeah, like mechanically, what would set it apart for people who do not care so much about books? Let's talk about that a little bit. Like you mentioned, you've written the lore, but like, is that in lore books or is that novelization? How have you done that?
Yes, so talking more on the lore, currently we have 2 ways that we're working on our lore. We have a World Anvil page where we're publishing most of it currently. Eventually, we're wanting to migrate away from that into more of our own independent, maybe like a wiki structure, something like that. Currently, my writing team publishes 2 articles a month, pretty much, with the exception being December, where in the past we've done something a little bit more special with kind of micro articles to fill corners that we would never get to in a normal schedule. About half of our lore is background information, and the other half of our lore is events as they're kind of happening in the course of the war. So last year, we had a lot of lore that revolved around the year 1938, because that's when the conflict starts. This year, we're in 1939. So it's almost like the war is happening in its own pace. And it's been a very interesting process for that. We're also working on an anthology series for some short stories set in our setting. This was done in part as a pledge goal for our own Patreon that we, not Patreon, our own Kickstarter that we had last year for our first plastic sets. Our fans definitely were rabid for it because we very quickly smashed through most of our goals within the first few days, and I've spent the past month or so editing short stories. It's been a lot.
What makes it mechanically unique from games like Warhammer and many of its pretenders?
A large part of Warhammer in its more recent history is, in a lot of ways, it is kind of getting simpler, more streamlined, and that's good for people who want to introduce new people into the tabletop wargaming scene. Our rules are pretty complicated, but a lot of the rules that we've worked on in the past are kind of optional in certain cases. We've danced around with ideas of a weather mechanic that probably won't go anywhere for a while, but we would like to expand the rules for people who want a more complicated, very crunchy experience. The 2 main things, though, that we really focused on, stuck true to in our development process, was alternative activation, because nobody wants to sit there for 15 minutes while their opponent is calculating stuff out and rolling for every single model.
Right, yeah.
Especially when you're running a 2,000 point game and it's a 3 hour ordeal. The other half of this is terrain. We have a very robust terrain system. We have engineering class units who are capable of building and dismantling certain types of cover, minefields, barbed wire. For certain factions, there's other terrain-like equipment that helps out. The Japanese, for example, have these these like spring-loaded shields that they can quickly like pop out and spring open to give a little bit of cover in the open field faster than others. We have portable shield generators for factions that are a little bit more high tech. We really seem to be enjoying it. The fans seem to really love our terrain and stuff. We're always trying to find new ways to kind of reinvent the wheel on on how certain types of cover work.
I'm trying to figure out, like to think of, like, are there any Dieselpunk franchises that are still going at the moment?
Well, so this is always the fun part, is trying to draw the line on what is and isn't Dieselpunk. But I would say currently in the moment, the closest people to us in the space is probably something like Conflict 47. Chronologically, they're a little bit later.
No,
Like
yeah.
we're kind of doing like a pseudo World War One,
Yeah,
World War
Conflict
Two, whereas
47,
they're
is that
doing
by Osprey Publishing?
believe that's Warlord.
Okay.
But they're a little bit more late World War Two into Cold War. We're a little bit more World War One and interwar period. But as far as Dieselpunk, I don't think there's any that come to my mind
Yeah, because
specifically.
we had Dust was, at least on the internet, Dust was popular, but personally I don't know
Yeah.
anyone who played it.
Some of the team was aware of Dust. I personally wasn't. I think I've only, to be honest, that most of my experience is in 40K
Yeah.
and Kill Team and
Yeah,
stuff
I
like
have
that.
two of their models, and I think they gave me a lore book when they were on Spiel, and then they just disappeared. Let me see, then you've got Tannhauser, which was a great board game that also just kind of vanished. I don't know what happened to that. Great board game, if you can find it, it's very good. Yeah, and then you had like some very small indie projects, like Acro Dieselpunk, which was, well, really more post-apocalyptic, utopian-esque stuff. Crimson Skies, of course, but that's its own niche. But I think that still has a community. That's about it. Like, my own stuff is kind of like a mixture of steampunk and dieselpunk. But yeah, I don't know. For some reason, currently on my YouTube channel, not that I get that many views, but some of my most watched videos on my channel is currently the one I made about Dieselpunk. I waited a long time with making a video. If you don't mind talking about genre for a little bit, allow me to
Of
rant.
course, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I'm a media and cultural historian in the daylight, so
Right,
it's
okay.
something that it's inevitable that I'm going to have to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, like, I made 3 videos, eventually. The first one was reacting to Tony Snipes. Are you aware of him?
Not personally, no.
No, he makes, he has the, oh, but now I'm fishing for the name. But he has like he has kind of like this fictional dieselpunk universe about a aero shipyard where they're building these World War II flying machines. So I highly recommend looking up Tony Snipes' work. He also makes miniatures. It's a bit more in the vein of Lost Exile. I don't know if you're familiar with that anime from 2001. So it's kind of like that, which is also one of the animes that really got me into doing more retro futuristic stuff. Raj Murata is my favorite retro futurist when it comes to aesthetics. And also, like, the world building of Last Exile is quite amazing if you analyzed it, which I did because I did lore videos on it, which you can still watch if you want an abridged version of Last Exile that also goes more into the hypothetical type of warfare, because it's a warfare that's highly dictated by culture. And when you actually analyze it and how the ships are designed, it actually makes complete sense how it was developed. So I highly recommend watching that. But yeah, I was making a response video to him about Dieselpunk, and like one of the problems is that he never defined it, what he meant by that. So, and that's kind of like, I had comments on that video like, oh, you're the only one who actually got like a good distinction between Dieselpunk and everything else. Because I don't know, the term Dieselpunk is being used very strangely these days. Like, people are saying, oh, Indiana Jones is Dieselpunk, Lovecraft is Dieselpunk. So basically anything that's from the 1940s or that's inspired by pulp, is now being called Dieselpunk by a particular section of the blogosphere, which kind of like shows you how incestuous YouTube and blogs can be, because they're all just copying each other. And but I was more and more thinking, okay, because I was like, okay, people don't make a distinction between Dieselpunk and pulp. That was my first conclusion. You mentioned like a lot of people like call you Weird War 1. Like Weird West is also one of those genres that has been completely pushed aside by steampunk. You know, when people talk about steampunk, at least when I started in 2012, like question was always, have you seen Wild Wild West? Because that was considered to be steampunk. It's not. It's Weird West, but those times of things. I'm actually working on a recent video where I talk about genres as well, where I put my own stuff. It's a website called Nerd for Hire, I think it was called. And he has actually a pretty good overview, like with circles rather than structures, of like where each genre is. And then he puts like steampunk next to the alternate history genre, on the edge with non-fiction. So it's fiction, but like really at the edge of non-fiction, which I think is very interesting.
Right, because there's a speculative element to it. You're
exactly.
anticipating the near future with steampunks. Therefore, it's almost non-fiction.
alternate history. I mean, steampunk there's a very fine line between alternate history and steampunk. For steampunk, I used the definition by Bruce Sterling, who wrote the Difference Engine, as cyberpunk in the past. So that's also what I applied, especially in my first novel. My question was in these videos was like, okay, but what separates dieselpunk from steampunk? And every time it came back to the 1940s, that like 1920s, 1940s, 1950s period. And I think the problem for both steampunk and dieselpunk, that people just take that for granted. You know, dieselpunk is World War II, steampunk is Victorian era. But I question, like, why, though? I think the answer lies in just how pop culture developed. Like, what are the tropes of early science fiction? Like, what are the tropes of early literature? Like, everything, like Sherlock Holmes, all those characters, all takes place in London or England or France, and that's where most of, like, all the steampunk aesthetics, etc. are based on. And the same goes for dieselpunk. But why those eras? And I think for the Victorian era, it's because that's the birth of modern pop culture. Like when we started to have like actual mass media, when we abandoned the medieval legends in favor of completely fictionalized characters that were, well, secular, so to speak. Like Sweeney Todd, Spring Heel Jack, Frankenstein, like all those things are from that era. But so that would explain why that's why it's the Victorian era, the 1900s, 1800s England. Okay, well, what's it with dieselpunk then? Like, why are especially Americans drawn to dieselpunk? Because we are not that drawn in Europe to dieselpunk at all.
Right.
And I think the reason for that... please let me know your thoughts on it.
No. I'm thinking. I'll let you finish your thought, but I have thoughts.
No. Okay. So, like, my thoughts of this is that, like, World War II, and you can see this in the aesthetics of dieselpunk very strongly, even in your stuff, is that like the Americans really have this idea that World War II was a just war, you know, and all the jingoistic stuff that comes with that, and you know this whole kind of like, well, very naive view of war with like the art that they put on bombers and stuff like that, for example. You know, I wouldn't almost fetishized, right? And there's also something very unique about the uniforms of that period, because the Americans, they have like round-shaped tanks, they've got round helmets, it all looks very soft. But then you look at the Germans, they've got all these boxy tanks, like all these square angles, and like also the German helmets are also angular. And you see that heavily reflected in dieselpunk aesthetics. Like, these are the good guys. They look like Americans. They've got round helmets, and they've got, like, you know, all those round shapes and Sherman-esque tanks. But the Germans, they all have these angular, cold, futuristic shapes. And where you see that very well depicted is in Star Wars. Because what are the rebel ships look like? They all have round shapes. They all look like kind of have these Beetle-esque shapes. But the Empire, on the other hand, like, it's all angular and triangular and all that stuff. So by the end, like as I worked on these videos, I actually kind of changed my mind on Dieselpunk a little bit. Like I still consider it kind of like a subgenre of steampunk, but like it does have its very own aesthetic manuals, I think, that we use instinctively because of our associations with round shapes and angular shapes. So for me, this is my definition of Dieselpunk, that it's Star Wars in the past,
Mm.
genre-wise.
Right, and there's definitely there are definitely aspects of that. I mean, a lot of people have always thought that George Lucas was taking obvious heavy inspiration from World War II
Oh
for
yeah,
the
like
aesthetics and the general
Leaving
theming of Star
films. Yeah,
Wars.
uh,
At the same time, there's also a lot of elements of even the Vietnam War is also a very a very heavy influence in Star Wars, but that's like the whole separate conversation that we could get
yeah.
Into the
That's kind of like
political
the
situation with
later stuff, I'd
Lucas.
say.
Yeah, yeah. The rebellion is very strangely coded in a complicated way because of that. But for the way I look at Dieselpunk, it's almost so like when you're talking about like historical scholarship, you always have these major movements
Hmm.
of certain types of scholarship, certain philosophical takes on what the role of
Hmm.
history is. There's always the post after it. Like the big one that everybody talks about is okay, well, you have modernity and you have post-modernity. So you
Hmm.
have this old world order that's clearly defined by historians, and then for the next 40 or 50 years, we've been trying to figure out what it is to be after that. And I guess for Americans, at least the way Americans look at diesel punk is okay, well, World War One was the death of the old imperial age. It was the death of the Victorian era. Quite literally, she dies, and everybody that's in charge during the First World War is her direct kin, essentially. So from like an American perspective, you get into this point of transition, World War One, and Dieselpunk is almost like the answer to steampunk. It's the okay, well, what happens now? Because
Hmm.
we had our speculative fiction, but now we've moved past the speculative fiction. We're living in that point that we were speculating on. How do we go from here? I think this is like an important thing about Dieselpunk is a lot of people critique the punk genres for the inclusion of the word punk
I'm not happy
because
with it myself, I must admit. Like, I
yeah,
understand
like
why the word steampunk came into being, because there was cyberpunk. Cyberpunk writers then started writing what they would later call steampunk, so it makes sense from that perspective. But, I mean,
mm,
the problem is not so much the name as it is what people project on it, right? Because so many like to see themselves as the rebels, even though all their
mm.
positions are extremely mainstream. But go on.
Right, and this is the weird thing about Dieselpunk, though, is that depending on how you're looking at it, it's kind of hard to argue with it at moments because it's like if you're looking at it from the American perspective, where the perception is that you're answering the status quo that was established by steampunk, then of course you're going to look at yourself as the rebels because the other side is the old order, the speculative fiction,
Right. Okay.
the
Yeah.
high Victorian age. Now we're gritty and everything is dark and bleak and we're tired of listening to you, old man. Like it's a different attitude, and a large part of it too is where the cyberpunk roots come from, I think, as well, because of course the cyberpunk as a genre has a lot of political messaging behind it. It has a lot of complaints about the environment, about society, about industrialization and worker abuse. That doesn't go away in Dieselpunk because it's the same order with less neon. That's what Dieselpunk is. It's you turn the lights off in a cyberpunk setting is what it is in a lot of ways.
Well, like
And
when
this is
people say such things, like what books or genres or what particular franchise are you thinking of?
so this is where it gets muddy for me. I focus a lot in East Asian media.
Hmm.
That's a big thing that I focus. I live in Japan currently.
Ah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, of course.
so Japanese cyberpunk doesn't have a diesel punk. In the way that Japan's own cultural punk movements developed, they had a steampunk, If you look at the
Steam
works of
Detectives
Tezuka,
and stuff like
Tezuka
that.
has a lot of Tezuka had a lot of steampunky works in his own thing, and there's a cyberpunk that develops, but the cyberpunk that developed out of Japan early on doesn't feel like cyberpunk that was developed in the West.
No, of course
It
not.
feels like Dieselpunk, and the reason is that the environments that are being portrayed in the early cyberpunk films in Japan are gritty industrial sectors. You have biker gangs clad in leather. It almost looks like it almost looks like if Mad Max took place in a city in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Not to say that Mad Max is entirely dieselpunk because just because there's bikes and they spew
I mean
diesel.
that's what you hear a
Yeah.
lot though. Like Mad Max is Dieselpunk. I'm like, oh my god, no.
I mean a big one. I'm sure you're familiar with Jinro the Wolf Brigade.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
and
I mean
Kerberos
that for
Panzer
me would be a great example of Japanese Dieselpunk. Yeah.
You're right, but there's no concept of dieselpunk in Japan. That's classified as cyberpunk here. And
Oh
that's what's so weird is that there is
really?
no
I mean
line.
I get why in a way. I do understand why that would be. But like here's kind of the thing, right? But because let me maybe this might help discussing this is that for me when I talk about steampunk I make a distinction between three things. That steampunk is not one it's not referring to one thing but to three separate things that people tend to confuse. First is what people mostly know is the aesthetics, right? The aesthetics of steampunk, which is like this kind of mixture of modern pop culture with archaic technology, usually like steampunk Batman, whatever. Look up any popular franchise, you'll find steampunk variations of it. So that's one. You have the costume community, which again is very different. They don't even read steampunk. Most of them read Gaslamp Fantasy. They're fantasy fans. They're not steampunk fans. And then you have the genre, which is that I write, for example, which I define as well. I don't just define as cyberpunk in the past. That's the original thing. The thing with Dieselpunk, it's different. The culture, when I look in Dieselpunk groups, they're big consumer fans. Like, and this is also kind of like why Steampunk kind of fell apart in ways is because it was originally created by creative people. When having these discussions, I think it's very useful to make a separation between creatives and consumers. They look at the same topic very differently. I look at stuff from the creative perspective. Like, why is Dieselpunk made the way it is? Why is Steampunk the way it is? And for consumers, it's like, well, Dieselpunk is supposed to look like this and Steampunk is supposed to look like that. And if it does not compute, then it must be either a completely new category or you're doing something wrong. Right? Like, as far as they're concerned, BioShock was made intentionally the way it is from point one, and then you've got a masterwork. So there's this massive miscommunication between creatives and consumers. Why I think also I'll go to bat for Ryan Johnson just a bit when he said something that a lot of people put attention on. He said, "Oh, I love it when people are split about my work," and then he talked about well, I don't know if he used the word deconstruction, but like subverting expectations, all that stuff, which from a creative person makes total sense that you want to do those things. That he did it wrong, that's a different matter, but like I understand where he was coming from when he said those things. And I think for a lot of consumers it was, yeah, but that's not what we wanted. We want Star Wars to be like this. And I think that's where a lot of the internet outrage, that miscommunication comes from.
I won't go too far in it because that's a whole separate rabbit hole, and I'm
Yeah,
sure
I agree,
a lot of people in my Discord will give me flack if I take too strong a stance on this. But my take has always been that The Last Jedi is the best movie in that trilogy, but it's bad Star Wars.
Right.
It's bad at being Star Wars, but
it
it's
has
still my favorite
the most
movie from that
interesting
trilogy.
ideas. Just the
It's
execution
a good film.
The execution was flawed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people often forget that art is an outlet first and a product second. And that man was not thinking about making that a product at all. He had an idea and he went for it,
Yeah.
and
He is a
now we're
creator's
living
creator.
in that world. Yeah, and to get back to like our vision of Dieselpunk from Archer, we very much have an idea and a message behind the setting that we put things in. Obviously, it leans very heavy in the sci-fi. Like I said, there's a lot of technological advances based on like a very small amount of changes that happened early in the timeline. Um, but ultimately, we like to stick with the diesel punk label mostly because of the messages that are attached when you're looking at diesel punk as a creative outlet. I mean, some of the things that we talk about, and we talk about the problems of imperialism. We talk about the negative sides of revolutions. We talk about rampant industrialization and the dangers of unfettered capitalism. I mean, like we basically throw all of our punches at that era in a wrapping of diesel, heavy armor, and the occasional sci-fi. We're trying to say a message in our lore, but also give people a fun game, and it's not always an easy balance. The war means different things for different people in the conflict. This kind of goes back to what you kind of said about the problem with Americans in Dieselpunk. If we look at World War II as this, very moral high groundy situation. You have good guys that are clear cut and you have bad guys that are clear cut. And really, we don't do that. And I think that's one thing we really strive for. And the war is taking place with these three factions, and ultimately they have very different outlooks on what the world should be in this new era, this era where they're finally reaching out into space, or let's we refer to it as the aether in the lore. The question is, what is the world order going to look like as things start to pull together? That these different ideas on how to govern clash. The League of Five Emperors still believes in staunch old age imperialism, noble families, strong alliance systems, all the stuff that dragged the Central Powers into World War One. You have the Anglo-Japanese Pact that is a little bit more opportunistic about it. In some cases, a little chauvinistic. A little bit more modern empire, and the negatives that come with basically a watchman state. A little bit of Big Brother is watching you at all times. Especially our theming with the British is very dystopic in its view on the role of government. It goes in very dark directions. But the side that the Americans are on aren't necessarily the good guys just because they're opposing these two things that they fought in World War One and World War Two. Just because they're fighting new empire and old empire doesn't necessarily mean that their way is the right way. Because here they are on a war that they're getting dragged into. The America has expanded and taken over the entirety of North America with the exception of Canada, just because Canada's their ally. People at home aren't happy. Leading up to the conflict, there's a major workers' riot in their space colony. The French just got through a very bloody, basically communist revolution that breaks out right before the war. And ultimately, the guys who are the moral high ground in a traditional diesel punky way are the ones that start the war. Like pretty abruptly, in our fan base, the French are kind of the bad guys. Even though they're, supposed to be fighting for this new left-facing anti-imperial dynamic in the world. They straight up just start the war by executing the Archduke. And yes, it's the same Archduke. Franz Ferdinand does not get away with anything just because he survives the 19 teens. So, ultimately what it comes down to is it's us critically wagging our finger in disapproval at every potential worldview that could come up in the setting. The war is just bad. It's just bad.
All right. Well, my neighbor keeps on drilling, so I think we're gonna have to like work a bit toward the end. But I think we had some interesting back and forth on the genre at least. So, what would you like to touch upon that we have not touched upon yet?
Well, in terms of the game, we are trying our best to expand out as many factions, give people as many opportunities to play the game how they want to, and you get to do it with some pretty cool models. We really pride ourselves on having a very unique line with a lot of our stuff. We really try to balance the historical elements well with creative new sci-fi and dieselpunky ways to kind of riff on the existing ideas. You know, for example, with Japan, which is split between the Army and the Navy pretty heavily. This time it's even worse. The Army is super indicative of this still existing samurai culture that is absolutely not going to go away, even as things industrialize to the point to where they still look like samurai. But then when you look closely, you realize, oh, these are all stamped pieces of metal. This isn't the fine lacquerware that has been finished. Their katanas are no longer folded 10,000 times. That's just a mold that they poured some steel into. Like, it's all style and no substance, and that's the point. The Navy is leaning too hard in the other direction. They're heavily modernizing. They're taking ideas from other countries, and they're just scary, but they're also really cool at the same time. I mean, I had to pester Jackson for a year to sculpt the Heike crab tank. It's my baby. I always love to see the crab tank get painted. But yeah, I think if anybody could take anything away, Marcher has cool minis. They got cool lore, and if you like rules that are a little bit more complicated than most games, you're gonna like the game. I don't know what else to say about that other than check it out. We have our Golden Dragon Games website. It's a little bare at the moment. We've had some people who've asked about it. We're in the process of remodeling our core website. You can find our models over on MMF for people who want to purchase those, or you can also subscribe to our Patreon, where you can get the monthly bundles of our models. Of course, these are all STL files at the moment. We have a robust community of merchants, and as well as fans who just happen to be nearby in certain cases and can get you models. So if 3D printing isn't your thing, we have merchants who can help you with that. If you have a 3D printer, you're in luck, because our files are very cool and, in my opinion, pretty reasonably priced. If you like our lore, you can check us out over on World Anvil. It's Marcher Empires at War. If you want all this information, you can just check us out on our Discord for Golden Dragon Games, where we have links to all of this. The game rules are free in PDF form. We're technically model agnostic, so if you want to paint some symbols on some rocks and throw those on a board, go right ahead.
All right, and with that, folks, we also are still doing late pledges for Nightwatch at the address that is listed below on the screen, and of course, they'll be in the description. So if you want an early print of Nightwatch and our associated minis, go right ahead. And of course, you can also help me make more content with original art, specifically original art, by supporting us either on Patreon or on REAM Stories, where you get free new short stories every week. And I'm also gonna try and put those on Substack and or newsletter. So you can find those at www.associationofishtar.com. And yeah, with new announcements coming soon. Yeah, Zach, thank you for being here. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. Let me know if you ever want to discuss something or whatever. I'm open to all suggestions. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna